Thai boxing. Thai boxing. Come see the Thais, watch how they fight with just everything. Their hands and feet and bows and knees. This is an art of boxing you would all love to learn. Ooh-ah.
Hello and welcome to the Eight Limbs podcast. I'm your host Ryan Wagner, and today I'll be covering the action in Muay Thai and kickboxing over the past few weeks. I'll start with the Phuket Superfight card on January 1st. It was a star-studded Muay Thai card featuring Rodtang versus Yodlekpet as the main event, and it had a ton of other high-level Thai fights on it, both on the undercard and the main card. So if you're ever disappointed with the state of MMA, that there's absolutely nothing going on right now, I'd heavily suggest you check this Phuket Superfight card out. So contrary to what we usually see from Rodtang, he didn't come out aggressive. Yodlekpet he's a tank. He's basically Muay Thai's answer to John Lineker. He comes forward relentlessly, bangs the body, attacks with body punches into leg kick combos. He's Rodtang, but more intense. So contrary to what we usually see from Rodtang, he was mostly fighting off the back foot here. He wasn't trying to meet aggression with aggression. Yodlekpet was coming forward aggressively, but he was relying on Rodtang to back up in order to work his way into range, rather than intelligently setting up his entries. He wasn't jabbing and feigning in, he was just kind of walking Rodtang down and then waiting until he got onto the ropes in order to unload. But the problem is that this approach let Rodtang score kicks on the way in and take free shots as Yodlekpet walked towards him. He had to walk through a lot of fire in order to get Rodtang to the ropes. And then once he did get Rodtang on the ropes, he was able to open up more with punch combos and leg kicks to the rear leg, but Rodtang was also countering with vicious elbows and knees, so he wasn't dominating him on the ropes either. When they exchanged in the open, Rodtang's combination work was more complex. He looked like a better boxer. He was hitting body and head combos, pivoting off, hitting check hook counters. Rodtang kind of showed a more crafty side to him here. He did that to some degree in his last fight a couple weeks ago against Jonathan Haggerty, walking down and slipping all his punches and countering his jab. But he was using defensive teeps to the leg to keep Yodlekpet at bay. He was jabbing and moving. He was landing counters after angling out. And when Yodlekpet was swarming against the ropes, Rodtang would tie him up in the clinch. So it was interesting to see someone like Rodtang, who's normally a tank, who just relentlessly walks guys down, batters their body and legs, to see him fighting like a crafty outfighter here. So guys like Yodlekpet, who fight like that, who look to come forward aggressively and just walk through their opponent's offense to batter them, often struggle with guys like Rodtang, who can stand their ground and throw back. It's the kind of RDA Rafael dos Anjos versus Eddie Alvarez dynamic, where the pressure fighter needs to back you up in order to make his best offense work. But the guy he's backing up is a monster puncher who's really good at getting you to walk onto his shots. That's kind of what we saw here, that Yodlekpet had to go through a lot of fire in order to get his preferred distance. And then once he got there, he wasn't owning the fight anyway. And Rodtang made that even worse by employing a lot of those disruption tactics that we see a lot of slick outfighters use to prevent Yodlekpet from flurrying on the ropes. So Rodtang won a fairly close but pretty clear decision. Yodlekpet, I thought, looked kind of flat. He's been on a bit of a slide recently, although he recently beat Rafi Bohic, which is a good win. I'm not too sure what's going on with him right now, where he'll be in the near future, but I think it might not be a bad idea for him to go off and fight some Farangs for a little bit, beat up on overmatched Europeans. He's been fed a steady diet of like really high-level Thais recently. He got battered by Rungnarai, and he lost to Sangmani recently before that, I think. So a break might be warranted there. Rodtang is not taking any breaks at all. He's already scheduled for a fight in a couple weeks, I believe. That just recently got announced. I forget who he's fighting, but he's been scheduled to fight Runkit in March for a while. That's going to be a really interesting fight. Runkit was supposed to fight against Keonar on this card, but I believe he got ill, so that didn't happen. Rodtang fought Runkit a while back, and he lost the fight. Runkit controlled him in kind of a similar way to how he controlled Yodlekpet. Rodtang was moving forward, trying to pressure. Runkit was jabbing him up, landing kicks as he walked forward and tying him up in the clinch. And Runkit has only looked more dangerous in his recent fights. He recently fought Saeksan, who also fought on this card, and just absolutely tore him apart. He boxed Saeksan up on the outside, and whenever he went forward, Runkit would just slice him up with knees and handle him in the clinch. So that'll be a really interesting fight. That's in March 7th, I believe. Now, let's take a look a little bit lower on the card. Phetsomjit Jitmuangnon fought Satanmuanglek Pechindi. Satanmuang. I'll call him Satanmuanglek because I don't want to call him Satan if that's not his name. So, okay. Phetsomjit is the Rajadamnern flyweight champion at 112 pounds, and Satanmuanglek is ranked number 2, so this was a high-level fight. Satanmuanglek was looking to pressure with boxing and elbows, but when he got Phetsomjit to the ropes, he would be intercepted with the clinch, and Phetsomjit was usually getting the better of the clinch. Phetsomjit would use his right collar tie to control Satanmuanglek's head, and then his left hand would be controlling inside or outside the bicep. So he had a good frame to both control Satanmuanglek's posture and to prevent his hand from swimming inside or landing elbows or doing work of his own. Whenever Satanmuanglek tried to swim an arm inside to secure a strong position, Phetsomjit would switch to disruption tactics, like framing off the face or hooking his forearm inside of Satanmuanglek's to either stall out the clinch or to prevent him from getting his position while he was landing elbows or knees or exiting the clinch. Phetsomjit has an interesting style. He has a really square stance and switches often, which is very good for defending kicks. With the weight being distributed relatively evenly between your legs, it allows you to pick up either leg. Often you'll see guys in Muay Thai kind of sitting on the ropes in a square stance, and it looks like it should be really exploitable, that their opponent should be able to step in and batter them. But it's really hard to attack that with kicks because the guy is free to pick up either leg very quickly. So there's no real open side. So either side you attack, you can pretty quickly defend. And if you step in with punches, those guys are looking to tie you up in the clinch. So that's dangerous too. And a lot of times we see this used against opponents who don't have a very tight boxing game. So they're kind of limited to flurries, which gets them clinched, or trying to pick off kicks, which again is hard on somebody standing in that square stance. Phetsomjit would often use the square stance to throw kind of arm punches from his shoulders, very non-committal punches with no hip movement, so they're hard to see coming. And it's kind of like that Max Holloway thing, where you can rattle off a few of them before the opponent has any chance to read them and defend. And he would use those to distract Satanmuanglek and march forward in order to set up his more powerful combinations or his clinch entries. After the third round of being kind of frustrated and disrupted a lot, Satanmuanglek really sold out on his pressure boxing to try and deal with that square stance he was using, where it was hard for Satanmuanglek to kick Phetsomjit. But whenever he did that, whenever he swarmed and tried to put really aggressive combos on him, Phetsomjit started lacing him with counter elbows on the way in. So another thing with this heavy boxing style is that if you're charging forward with aggressive combinations, then you're very open. Your head stays on the center line. You're open to being hit with those intercepting elbows. And it's not something we see a lot in other striking arts. But in Muay Thai, it's a real danger. And his heavy flurries, again, were making him more vulnerable to the clinch. So Phetsomjit kept using the clinch to disrupt his combinations And late in the fight, he would like duck in on body locks, almost like he was shooting a reactive takedown. He hit a head and arm throw at one point. So the fourth and fifth round were kind of like an MMA fight. In the later rounds, Satanmuanglek had a bit more success getting his inside position in the clinch and using elbows, but Phetsomjit was largely still controlling the entries and getting the better of the clinch battle. Again, he would like do those reactive ducks in on the hips in order to tie Satanmuanglek up, keep him from getting his combinations off, and stall him out. Phetsomjit really played a masterful game of disrupting Satanmuanglek's offensive patterns. Whenever he landed a strike, whenever Phetsomjit landed something, his hands would immediately be out, framing off, posting on the face to blind him and disrupt his balance, or in a long guard to prevent any kind of return while he backed out. He was continually destabilizing Satanmuanglek's base in the clinch with turns. He was catching his kicks and sweeping, and he would often use a tight inside leg kick, foot sweep, to off-balance him. So when Satanmuanglek had him on the ropes, he would take his lead leg and just kind of kick out the calf or ankle of Satanmuanglek to knock him off balance. This is something you'll hear me talk a lot about, this kind of disruption tactics and off-balancing and destabilizing. It's a really important part of Muay Thai, which is scored not exactly on optics, but on control. And a big part of that control is having control of your opponent's balance. If you can make them look silly a lot by turning them in the clinch and kind of throwing them around or sweeping them when they come into attack, it scores very highly. And Phetsomjit was doing a lot of that, sweeping him when he was trying to use his power combinations, just framing off to destabilize his balance and blind him to his attacks, and so forth. It was a really great performance from Phetsomjit. I don't think this was for a title because this card, the Phuket Superfight card, wasn't at a stadium. It was an outside of stadium fight card. But like I said, Phetsomjit is the 112-pound champ, and Satanmuanglek is number 2 ranked at Rajadamnern. So this was basically like the quality of a title fight. Our next fight is Rungnarai Kiatmukau versus Phetsomai Sorsomai. I really like Rungnarai. He's one of my favorite fighters. He's a really slick outfighter with a very defensive style. He has a really neat kind of long guard. He'll have his lead hand extended in the normal long guard and cross the rear hand over his face, sort of like a boxing cross-arm guard, like Archie Moore, but obviously without the very active movement at the waist. And he doesn't use it as a static guard, which you see a lot of guys do. You'll see them kind of hold it out while they're moving forward or backing up. And what that does is it lets their opponents kind of work around it. If you're holding the guard out and you don't adjust it, there's a lot of opportunities for guys to find holes in it. You can uppercut down the middle, hook around the side, and the more it stays the same, the more you don't adjust it, the more they can manipulate its positioning with combinations and find holes. But Rungnarai's guard is super responsive. He's great at seeing punches coming and adjusting his guard in order to deal with threats that his opponent's offering. He also uses a tight high guard that he'll kind of combine with that. So his rear hand will kind of alternate crossing over his face in that cross guard position and defending tight at the ear. This was a pretty slow-paced fight. Phetsomai kind of gave Rungnarai the fight he wanted. Rungnarai had fought Phetsomai before, I believe only a couple months ago, and he won that one too. After that, a couple fights after that, he lost his 115-pound Lumpini title to Channeler Meneathan in a fight that I think Rungnarai should have won. So this is kind of a pick-me-up fight for Rungnarai. Phetsomai is also a great opponent and one of the higher-ranked fighters in his division. So this is putting Rungnarai, his win here, kind of put him on the path back to a rematch with Channeler. I think actually he might have been scheduled to fight Channeler, but that got canceled for some reason. I believe I read that somewhere, but it's very hard to keep up with Thai news, so I'm not confident in that. But this was a slow-paced fight, mostly took place on the outside. Phetsomai had a lot of trouble scoring because Rungnarai was consistently countering his kicks. Every time Phetsomai kicked him, whether it was blocked or it landed clean, Rungnarai would catch or block and return everything. You often see these sequences in Muay Thai where one fighter will catch a kick and then return a zone, and then the other fighter catches it, and they keep going back and forth catching their kicks. And Rungnarai pretty much always made sure he was last. And Rungnerai's kicking offense himself is very hard to counter. He has extremely tight kicking technique, and he would often score on Phetsomai with body kicks that he couldn't defend in time. You'll often see guys block outwards. They'll pick up their knee and kind of turn it out. And Rungnerai's kicks are super fast, efficient, and tight. And his often just came up the middle, in between Phetsomai's legs before he could block it. Another thing I like about Rungnerai's game is that he uses his teep in a really unique way. Usually when you see guys teep, it's very forceful. If they're an outfighter, they'll teep you hard in order to like throw you back and keep you off them, to keep you from pressuring them. If they're a guy who wants to walk you down and swarm you, they'll do it the same way. They'll slam these teeps into your body to push you back and get you on the ropes so they can open up with their combos. Rungnarai doesn't teep very hard at all. He has a really light teep, and he uses it as an outfighting tool to jam his opponent's entries. Instead of throwing a really committed teep that could get him countered, or that takes more time, he'll just do a really quick kind of leg teep. There's not much power at the hip, and he often throws it to his opponent's leg or to their hip as they come forward, and it just jams their balance and their stance and prevents them from closing distance on him so he can slip away and get back to his preferred outfighting distance. He'll throw it really well moving backwards too. A lot of times you'll see opponents try to advance on him with a jab or a left hook, and he'll raise his rear hand to block that while simultaneously throwing that teep to the hip to keep them away. He fought off the ropes really effectively too here. Whenever Phetsomai got him to the ropes and tried to put combinations on them, he'd use that responsive high guard and cross long guard kind of thing in order to prevent Phetsomai from landing anything with his punch combos. But he was also constantly countering with his own kicks and knees. And just like Phetsomjit against Satanmuanglek, whenever Phetsomai tried to kick him on the ropes, he would catch the kick and counter with kicks or knees of his own. And he used that same inside leg kick sweep in order to destabilize Phetsomai's combinations against the ropes. But unlike Phetsomjit, he was also using it to bait entries. So Phetsomai would pressure him back to the ropes and then he would stand at range trying to figure out how to enter safely. And Rungnarai he'd kick out his calf or ankle to knock him off balance. And it made Phetsomai get a bit more desperate with his entries. Like he'd fall off balance and then kind of fall forward and try to salvage it with a punching combination. But Rungnarai would turn that into counters and land elbows or knees or clinch him and beat him up there. It was a really good performance from Rungnarai. I would like to see a rematch with Shanneler Menaethin as soon as possible. Because like I said, I thought he won that fight for the Lumpini's 115-pound title. And with high-level Thai fighters, you'll often see them fight each other very often. It's not uncommon for them to fight like 3 times in a year. When Thanonchai beat Kulabdam the first time in, was it 2019 or 2018? It was recently. Thanonchai beat Kulabdam in one of his kind of breakout performances, and then they scheduled the fight 2 more times back to back within 3 months. So they fought each other right away 3 times. So I think that is probably what they'd look to do next, but I'm not really familiar enough with Thai booking to say for sure. That's definitely the fight I want to see for Rungnarai. Finally, on the Phuket Super Fight card, Saeksan or Quan Wang fought Thanonchai Somwang Kayang. We'll just say Saeksan and Thanonchai. And that's Thanonchai with an O, not Thanonchai, who we'll be talking about later too. Yeah, I'm just as confused as you are. If I have any actual Thais listening to this broadcast, I'm very sorry. I have absolutely no idea how to pronounce these names. I'm doing my best, but I know I'm horrible at it. So, anyways, this I told somebody that I was trying to get into Muay Thai that they should watch Rodtang and Yodlekpet because it was kind of like Muay Thai's John Lineker versus John Lineker. But in hindsight, I'm forced to award Saeksan versus Thanonchai the Lineker versus Lineker award for fight of the night. It was great. I don't have a ton to say about this technically, but it was an absolute banger. Saeksan was coming forward behind a relentless barrage of punches, kicks, knees, and elbows, periodically imitating a Beyblade with silly spins. You don't like see spinning back fists in Muay Thai very often, but he was spinning all over the place. They were both having a ton of fun. They were smiling and laughing whenever Saeksan did his spinning stuff and like stumbled around. They'd both like smile and tap hands. It was great. In the fourth round, someone landed an elbow, and then the other guy felt obligated to get it back, as one does, of course. And the whole round was them basically just elbowing each other's faces off. It was amazing. So yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say about that technically. Both Saeksan and Thanonchai are past their best. Their Saeksan is like 31 years old, and Thanonchai has been out of high-level stadium fights for a while. So neither of them are going to set the world on fire at this point, but they still put on a hell of a show, and it was amazing to watch. If there's one fight you watch from this week, I absolutely recommend this, Saeksan versus Thanonchai, and I'll post the video on the article that I post to the fight site. And so that clears up the Phuket Super Fight card. And now I'll go through the rest of the week in reverse chronological order. Yesterday on Saturday, February 1st, Giorgio Petrosian fought. If you're in any way familiar with kickboxing, you know Petrosian's name. He would be my pick for the greatest kickboxer of all time, and he is the most skilled kickboxer I've ever seen. He is not in his prime at this point, but he's still amazing to watch. His opponent was Gaetan Dambo. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I have not heard of this guy, so right away you know that it wasn't like a high-level matchup for Petrosian. The guy didn't look bad, but he was very clearly out of his depth, and it was more of a showcase fight. I honestly can't even tell you what Dambo is good at, because Petrosian just didn't let him do anything at all. So instead I'll talk more about Petrosian's game. When I wrote my article on Jose Aldo for the fight site's top 20 greatest fighters of all time list, I mentioned that he had kind of a unique quality that you almost never see in MMA, that his skill set is specialized around mitigation, around preventing his opponent from working rather than enforcing his own work, but on just denying his opponent opportunities to do the things they want. It's a game that Floyd Mayweather plays in boxing, and I compared him to Giorgio Petrosian, who does that better than anyone else in kickboxing. Petrosian's game is built around this concept of mitigation, only allowing lopsided exchange. He doesn't permit even trades, or denying his opponents the opportunity to answer with their own offense entirely. His footwork and distance management is designed to keep him always just outside his opponent's range, always ready to counter when they step forward, but just far enough away to prevent them from entering cleanly. And his own entries are always designed with safety in mind. He'll jab to force a response, or push off to tie up his opponent's guard to make sure they're committed to doing something other than attacking before he hits them. He also has the classic Petrosian combo is shooting out kind of a short straight, which ends up being like an arm punch. There's no hip commitment, using it to hop step into the pocket, and once his opponent's arms are tied up in their guard, committed to blocking his straight, landing a knee to their stomach, and then pivoting out. He uses that really short straight that you'll see from guys like Israel Adesanya, where they just shoot it out right from the shoulder. They don't throw it like a normal boxing straight, where you twist your hips into it and pivot on the ball of a foot. But it comes really quickly, and there's almost no opportunity to read it. You don't see the fist turnover. you don't see them load up the punch with their hip, and you don't see the hip or shoulders turn through. The first thing that comes is the arm as it's extended onto your face. So it's really good both as a feint to get people biting on that and set up knees or kicks, or to carry him into range safely. He'll, like I said, he'll hop step in behind it. So he'll flash that short straight while he takes a little bounce into range in order to get him into clinching range or kneeing range. Um, and he has a ton of tactics that are designed around mitigating his opponent's offense and preventing them from comfortably attacking. Petrosian is probably the best striker I've seen at like pushing his opponents, just either like using a short collar tie to push on their head as he pivots out, or drawing a high guard and then just touching their arms and pushing off their guard to manipulate their balance. And he's always just picking at his opponent's hands and guard. In this fight against Dambo, he landed a great counter where he attacked and then he anticipated Dambo's counter. And then as he was going back to counter his counter, he just gave a little tiny tap on his guard to let him know that something was coming off the lead hand right before he speared him with a left overhand. If you watch Petrosian's fight with Robin van Roosmalen, nowhere does he show this concept of pushing off and framing better than in that fight. Van Roosmalen is known for his commitment to like a tight high guard. He plays a very traditional Dutch style. And Petrosian was just constantly manipulating his balance and preventing him from ever feeling comfortable transferring his weight, constantly pushing off, using hand traps, tying up his hands. He's a master at that. And Petrosian's been fighting for a very long time. He's out of his prime at this point. But in his late career, he's proven to be a lot more willing to sit down on punches. Where he used to be the kind of prototypical points fighter, as a lot of people would say. I hate that term because he doesn't fight for points. He's a master at controlling his opponent's offense and implementing his own fight. He's just not terribly concerned with finishes. But yeah, in his recent fights, he's taken a lot more of an offensive, aggressive approach, and he beat the complete shit out of Gaetan Dambo. He's beaten a lot of opponents up recently, which is not something he does very often. But even nowadays, even when he does sit down on those heavy punching combos, he still does it with safety in mind. He won't just charge into the pocket and start brawling recklessly. He'll set up his exchanges in a way that it either leaves his opponent at a disadvantage or removes any possibility of them being offensive entirely while he's able to get his own off. He'll use a lead hook to hop step outside their stance, so they have to turn to face him before they can do anything. And then once he's safe outside their stance, he'll throw a flurry. He's always cognizant of opportunities for his opponent to return when he's throwing combinations in the pocket, and he's always ready to slip and counter. And he's amazing at anticipating his opponent's likely counter too. So he knows that if his recent punch, if he just threw like a 2-3 upstairs and then straight to the body, he knows that his opponent is probably going to try to hit him as he pops up with a straight or with a left hook or something. So he'll be ready, watching for that specific counter that he's anticipating and ready to slip it and counter that. So yeah, this fight, it was pretty much a classic Petrosian performance. It wasn't a competitive fight. It wasn't a great fight from like a competition standpoint, but it was still a lot of fun to see Petrosian just styling on some dude. There was also a lot of action over the past couple weeks at Lumpini and Rajadamnern. Several titles changed hands. The first one we'll talk about is Phetsomjit Songpon against Thanonchai Chennai Don Wong. Phetsomjit was the Rajadamnern super flyweight champion at 115 pounds for quite a while. He lost it to Thanonchai in this fight. I couldn't find the full fight. I only have highlights, so I don't have like a heavily detailed breakdown of this. I only saw like 8 minutes of the fight. But from what I saw, Thanonchai was able to force Phetsomjit back to the ropes and land combinations. And I was talking a lot earlier about how a lot of these guys struggled to land combinations when they had their man on the ropes because the guy would either tie them up in the clinch or he'd be standing square ready to defend their kicks, and they didn't have the punching offense necessary to work in on a guy on the ropes like that. Thanonchai has a longer, much more bladed stance than we usually see in Muay Thai, so that allowed him to pick Phetsomjit off from range on the ropes and box him up at a distance where he wasn't exposing himself to counters or the clinch. So he could sit back, flash the jab in his face, and hit him with punching combinations where Phetsomjit wasn't able to work his clinch game and wasn't really prepared to counter. Phetsomjit also seemed to struggle a little bit with the southpaw-southpaw matchup. He had trouble landing his kicks. Thanonchai was a lot sharper on the outside. He would go to his rear side kicks that didn't really work terribly well because he didn't have the open side. And Thanonchai was consistently able to use his feints and his jab to draw kicks out of Phetsomjit when he had him against the ropes and then step in to counter him. Yodlekpet fought Thanonchai Rajadamnern on Friday, January 24th. Yodlekpet is a pressure clincher. He looks to push guys back to the ropes, and then once they're off balance, hanging on the ropes, use that opening to enter the clinch and beat them up with elbows and knees. Here he was forced to play a little bit more of a range striking game because Thanonchai had a large height and reach advantage. He worked a lot more with punching and kicking combinations than you usually see from him. He hurt Thanonchai early with a flurry off a caught kick. Thanonchai looked pretty bad defensively, which left him quite open to Yodlekpet's work at range, and Yodlekpet usually isn't the sharpest range kickboxer anyway. A lot of the fight was Yodlekpet kind of clinching in reverse, using his great clinch skills to prevent Thanonchai from working inside. When Thanonchai tried to close distance and grab a hold of him, he would frame off the face, destabilize him with turns and trips. And when Thanonchai got solid positioning in the clinch, he got like a lock with his hand behind Yodlekpet's head, or he got a collar tie. Yodlekpet would kind of turn to the side and wrap his head sort of like a headlock in order to stall him out and prevent him from getting any offense off while the ref broke up the clinch. The last round was Thanonchai beating him up a little bit. He pressured a lot more heavy and started putting hard punch flurries on Yodlekpet. He was doing better in the clinch in that round, landing elbows off of hand traps, and he'd work inside to inside position in the clinch and get his elbows off. Thanonchai's good work was mostly in that last round when he was already well behind. Even though he won it very heavily, it wasn't quite enough to convince the judges to give him a win because he was working from a deficit already. And Yodlekpet ended up winning for his kicks and clinch work. I thought that Thanonchai's work in the last round was more significant than a lot of the stuff Yodlekpet was doing, but since he lost the third and fourth round quite clearly, and most of his big offense was punching combinations, whereas Yodlekpet was working with kicks and clinch work, he was never going to get that from Thai judges. But Yodlekpet is one of the better guys in the heavier divisions, and Thanonchai I think he's pretty new to elite Muay Thai. He's 20 years old, I think, right now, which isn't old for a Thai, or which isn't young for a Thai at all. But the heavier divisions tend to trend a little bit older, and he fights above 140 pounds. So he's an interesting prospect to keep an eye on. His clinch looked really good. He was competitive there with Yodlekpet, who's one of the better clinch fighters. He has a little bit of work to sharpen up his skills at range, but I think he'll give a lot of like the more aggressive boxers and Phetsomjit trouble. That was a fun fight. Panpayak Sitchabuntham fought Rungkao War San Prapai. Rungkao is Rajadamnern's 130-pound champ. I couldn't find a full fight for this one either. All I could find was the highlights. Fights at Rajadamnern are hard to find video of. Usually you can only find them on SMM TV's YouTube channel, unless they're one of the bigger fights. Sometimes they'll upload them, the full version. But this was like an 8-minute highlight. Rungkao played a typical tall Muay Thai game, marching Panpayak down with knees into the clinch. Panpayak is more of a Muay mat. He likes to land punches and work with punching into low kick combos, but Rungkao's aggressive hand fighting shut the lanes out for punches. So he would come in with his hands extended and work hand traps into the clinch and tie up Panpayak's hands so he couldn't comfortably box. What it does, controlling the hands like that with the gloves extended, it jams the lane for straight punches, so it's very hard to get off jabs and rear straights, and forces you to punch around them. But when you go to hook around their extended hands, you're taking your elbows away from your face, so it gives them easy entries to the clinch or to elbows. Runkao would use long knees from outside to close distance and pressure Panpayak back. A lot of times they wouldn't land, but Panpayak would have to like hop back or switch stance and move backwards to defend them. And then Runkao could get him on the ropes and into the clinch, whether he landed the knee or not. He also entered the clinch on the counter a lot, which was really slick. He would pull back from a punch of Panpayak's and grab his head in a collar tie when he was still recovering. He also did a really good job drawing those counters out with entry feints or by lifting his leg to show a kick. And then when Panpayak went to take advantage of it by punching him, he'd slip it and enter the clinch. He combined that knee-based pressure with an active jab. He would flick it in Panpayak's face after throwing knees, so he wasn't able to regain his distance. He couldn't get like his stance or balance back to circle off or to throw a teeps because Runkao's jab was keeping him off balance and keeping him off the back foot after he'd pressure in with knees. Panpayak did a decent job of tying up his arms on the inside, but Runkao was landing well on his way into the clinch, and once he got into the clinch, he was doing work with elbows and knees. And yeah, two more fights. Kong Methi Sor Animat fought Adtuwada Tor Surat for Lumpini's minimum weight title at 105 pounds. The most significant part of this fight were Adtuwada's kick counters. There'd often be sequences where they both caught and returned multiple kicks, but Adtuwada would usually be the one landing last, which is high scoring in Thailand. If you catch a kick and counter back with your own, and then your opponent can't return, the judges score that highly. Adtuwada would also pull back when Kong Methi tried to kick him and slip the kick and counter with his own. Kong Methi spent most of the fight on the front foot. He tried to kick with him at range first, but quickly started trying to clinch more when the range kicking didn't work out too well. Neither guys did a ton of clean work in the clinch, but Adtuwada was able to land some significant shots when Kong Methi was pushing forward into the clinch. As a couple of the other fights do, this fight demonstrates how a lack of boxing skill set can hurt guys. Kong Methi spent most of the fight pressuring, but once he got Adtuwada to the ropes, he wasn't able to do much. He could only really kick or clinch because he didn't have a developed boxing game. So Adtuwada was able to just sit on the ropes in that square stance that I've been talking about a lot, and he had a much easier time defending the kicks and preventing Kong Methi from clinching, because it's much easier to disturb a kicker with your back on the ropes, with your stance squared up like that, than it is a puncher. Because as I said before, you have your weight distributed relatively evenly, so you can lift both legs to check. You still have your hands, so you can extend to frame off, but it's not good against a heavy boxing skill set unless you can turn them into the clinch. Because with that stance squared up, you don't have a rear leg to cushion the impact. Your head and your body is a wider target because you're not bladed and you don't have the shoulder in front. So guys can kind of tee off with punching combinations if they can work inside patiently and not expose themselves to the clinch. But Kong Methi didn't really have that option here. And he tried to high kick Adtuwada a few times when he was on the ropes, but Adtuwada was able to just pull back and lean against the ropes. If you compare that to Thanonchai's fight against Phetsomjit, with a more boxing-centric attack, he was able to pick Phetsomjit apart on the ropes instead of having to default to kicks, which are easier to counter. Adtuwada also did a lot of clever things with his kicking in this fight. At one point, he landed a round kick and immediately turned it into a teep off the same leg without planning to prevent a counter. You'll often see Thais do this floating block, where they'll throw a kick and then immediately turn the kicking leg into a check without touching it down. So their opponent, who's immediately trying to return his own kick, ends up getting theirs blocked. And Adtuado is teeping off the floating block. He also at one point threw a kicking combo with a short knee in between his kicks, and he didn't aim the knee to like land at the body, but he just kind of threw it up so that when Kongmithi threw a counter kick, it hit the thigh and like disturbed his balance. And then he was able to follow up with another kick. That was pretty cool. It was a really nice performance from Adtuado. And finally, Phetsomjit Bird Rangsit fought Yodpanam Porfet Kaikeu. This wasn't a title fight, but Yodpanam is highly ranked. I haven't heard of Phetsomjit before, but I really liked him. I'm going to have to check out more of his fights. He has a really interesting style. He's a Muay mat, so he focuses on punching combinations and low kicks. But he has a really square stance, which is what you would expect to see more from a kicker. Somebody who likes to work in the clinch or likes to pressure with knees. Muay mats, punching-focused fighters usually stand a little bit more square. But Phetsomjit's square stance allows him to deal with kickers very well. A lot of times, these boxers, guys that are looking to use more punching and low kick combinations, struggle with guys who can extend the distance and keep them on the outside with kicks. But Phetsomjit's square stance allows him to check really easily. He'll often stand pretty much squared right up at range with his rear leg elevated, so he's ready to block the open side or to teep off of it. He has a really handsy style too. It's kind of like similar to Rumble Johnson, where he'll stalk forward in a square stance, using his hands extended to manipulate his opponent's balance and guard and defend their punches. But he doesn't just pressure aggressively. He also uses a square stance to like pivot and move laterally. One of the advantages of a square stance is that it allows you to move laterally very easy. If your stance is super bladed, it's hard to cleanly like sidestep or to pivot. But Phetsomjit would like sidestep away from Yodpanam's offense to create angles for his own kicks. He was also like shifting stances in exchanges and landing like backstepping counters off of his like lateral movement. He would use his square stance to like defend kicks at range, and then when Yodpanam came in, he would step back and put himself into a different stance and hit a backstepping counter, then like exit on a different angle. It was really slick. The fight took place mostly at range for the first few rounds, with Yodpanam looking to score with kicks and Phetsomjit attacking with combinations. Later in the fight, when Yodpanam was losing, he started trying to clinch aggressively, but he wasn't getting a ton done. Phetsomjit wasn't trying to clinch in extended exchanges, but he was actively striking on clinch breaks with punching or elbow combinations into leg kicks. His hands-out style also made it a lot easier for him to enter the clinch or disrupt Yodpanam's own clinch entries. He'd usually secure inside position when Yodpanam tried to grab him. He was doing a really good job with his teeps too. Whenever he exited an exchange, he would like throw a punching combination into a leg kick and then teep on exit as he was backing out so Yodpanam couldn't return. And after he was getting outstruck, Yodpanam started trying to pressure into the clinch aggressively, but he wasn't getting too much done, and Phetsomjit was still finding spots to land his combinations and kick well. So Yodpanam is quite an impressive win. I haven't heard of Phetsomjit before, but I'll have to check more of him out, because I like him a lot. I'll post on the article I read up for the fight site, I'll post an Imager album with clips I made from Phetsomjit, so even if you don't watch the full fight, you can see some of the cool stuff he's doing. I think that about covers it for the Muay Thai and kickboxing fights. We'll be back in another 2 weeks. This is a bi-weekly show. And keep your eyes peeled on thefightsite.com. We have a lot of exciting new content coming to you. In the month of February, we're going to be previewing and breaking down Absolute Championship Akhmat, or ACA's lightweight division. By the time this podcast comes out, we'll probably have already released a big article on their lightweight division, going over the most interesting fighters, their top 10, and explaining what makes them so special And we're going to release 1 or 2 articles per week on their more interesting guys in more depth. Our first article in that series will be talking about Hussein Kaliev. So keep your eyes peeled on Wednesday for that. And I'll see you guys later.
Their hands and feet and balls and knees. This is an art of boxing you would all love to learn. Ooh-ah. Small, no need to fear. Strike right and left with your and bow and with your knees. Now suck them hard with your soul and then kick out and on. Wow.